Molly here. If you like what we're doing and you want us to keep doing more of it, please hit that subscribe button so that we can get monetized and we can keep bringing you this kind of content and more. The Last of Us Episode 3 is making me eat my words a bit for the praise I gave Episodes 1 and 2. HBO, I thought, had done such a good job of remaining very faithful to the source material, and then Episode 3 came along and just blew all that right out of the water.
It was sort of faithful until after we watched the game footage, because we mentioned in our last video, we have not played the video game. So what we had been doing is watching the episode and then immediately going to YouTube and watching the game footage that covers that piece. When Joel and Ellie were walking down that road, I was like, okay, this is just like episode 1 and 2, we're moving forward. Then somehow they got stuck in this flashback. And by they, I mean Joel. He appeared ever so slightly in this flashback. Only in the TV production, not even factoring in the game, I was getting bored. We were stuck in this town with this character, and maybe for like 5 minutes I could have went along with that. But we were stuck in flashback for like 85% of the episode. We were in a flashback that was boring.
It was like being stuck on the farm in season 2 of The Walking Dead all over again.
You and I were sitting through this going, well, if the game covered this and they've been respectful mostly so far, we just have to go with this. Maybe it'll come together. And then later when we found out that this isn't even faithful to the game, other than the two characters being in a relationship.
I'll just sum up. In the game, Joel took Ellie to meet up with this guy who he worked with this guy. Yeah, Bill. And they go and they meet up with Bill. Joel wants Bill to help him acquire a car. Bill is like, well, I don't have that, but we can get the parts for that and we can get something going for you and then you can get the hell out of here. And during this time that they're searching for these parts, etc., Bill and Ellie keep sniping at each other. That was entertaining. We find out that there is somebody else in this town, Frank, who used to be Bill's partner. I took that to mean that they were gay. But in the video game, they were no longer together. And so they stumble upon Frank, who appears to have killed himself, and he had bites on him, so it was clear that he had done something similar to what Tess had done. He took his own life instead of allowing himself to be changed into one of those zombies. And while we're there at Frank's house, it's discovered that Frank actually took a bunch of Bill's stuff when they broke up, and he'd actually left a note that he was going to be leaving town, and he was stealing this battery, which actually ties back into what was going on in the television series. But he was going to use this battery for his truck and take himself and some of Bill's stuff and just leave town. Unfortunately for Frank, he got bit, so he killed himself instead. It was really kind of funny because Bill is cursing Frank that he had taken a bunch of his stuff, and this note that Frank had left for Bill was very not nice.
It was similar to the note in the TV series that was left for whoever, or Joel, probably Joel, where the letter said something like, you kept whining about your battery, I took your battery, I hated living in that town, being with you is just not a good thing. In the game, between the Ellie and Bill sniping as they were looking for car parts, and then later you found out, because in the game footage that we watched, Bill was walking across, when they came across Frank's place, and he's like, wait, that's my car battery. There's more of my stuff. And then when he read over that letter, Bill was like, well, F you too, Frank.
Yeah, because Frank was basically taunting him in the letter. And it was actually pretty humorous. It was a broken up couple, and the one, well, had thought he'd gotten the better of the other, but then he went and got himself bitten, so he had to just kill himself. I mean, it was actually pretty humorous in a dark humor kind of way.
Yep.
As opposed to what they did in the television show, which was spend almost the entire episode showing us this fantasy relationship between Bill and Frank. I didn't really see any negativity between the two in the entire episode, unlike the broken up version that was in the original video game. The only fight we really saw Frank and Bill having was when Frank wanted to gussy up the outside of the house and some of the shops in town. And the way that they had them fighting, it just seemed so stereotypical to me. And it just goes back to how I've felt about a lot of these things. The writing of diverse characters, just it seems to come from a really stereotypical place on the part of the writers. Instead of portraying Bill and Frank as a broken up couple trying to one up each other, just like a lot of broken up couples would do, they instead made it so that it was this
perfect relationship.
Yeah, and the one fight that they did have was about beautifying the outside of the house. I mean, it felt really, really not good to me.
And then the ending in the TV series. So after Bill and Frank were together and they got older, what happened is Frank had some sort of degenerative disease, something like MS or something. He was wheelchair bound. He was having motor issues. And so instead of living like that, he decided he wanted to commit suicide. So he was going to overdose. He could barely feed himself. He was going to have Bill stick the overdose in his drink and he was going to drink it and then die. And you didn't get to see this, but the assumption was that after we think that Bill overdosed his as well.
I think he did both classes. I mean, honestly, we were fast forwarding through some of it, so.
We saw a letter that Ellie found where it's like, don't open this door. We open up the windows, the implication being so you don't smell our corpses. So Bill must have climbed into bed with Frank and they died in bed together. If this was a different story, maybe that would have been a good story. I don't know. I mean, I was bored through most of this episode, but that was not at all how we watched the video game footage. A side tangent, because this is something that has bothered me for a while. I noticed this a lot with the game footage we watched, is what they're doing to Ellie right now. Ellie, in that video game footage we watched, she was climbing over fences and opening doors. She was climbing through dog doors to open up doors. She was being boosted up onto school buses to bring down ladders. And Ellie in the TV series is essentially a package that Joel is taking around, including at the ending where there was a similar scene where they got into the truck at the end between the TV and the video game. In the video game, they needed to push the truck to get it going and pop the clutch. And Bill was trying to explain to Ellie, because she was the smaller person, so she was going to steer while Bill and Joel pushed the truck. And Bill was like, well, let me teach you how to pop a clutch. And she's like, I know how to do this. So clearly Ellie knew how to drive a truck. But in the TV series, she was sitting there playing with the mirrors going, this is like a spaceship. I've never been in a pickup truck before. And they're essentially making Ellie a non-thing. And I know it bothered you a little bit when Ellie in the TV series was exploring in the cellar. And what was the one item she found?
A box of tampons. Tampax, to be precise. It just felt like a marketing ploy. Just really big time.
And maybe later in the game, they're going to bring that in. But this just didn't feel right. This whole episode, I feel bad because episode 1 and 2, we made that video. The title on it was a HBO makes faithful adaptation. It can be done. And then this episode seemed like this was the exact opposite of a faithful adaptation.
Yeah, I mean, they took a side character and they completely changed his life. In fact, in the game, he is still alive when Joel and Ellie leave. And in the TV series, he's dead before Ellie and Joel even show up. So, and the other thing that bothered me, and who knows, maybe this happens in the game later, but when she was in the basement and she found that box of tampons, Ellie also found an infected person that was trapped down there, and she stabbed him to death. It was really weird. That didn't happen in the section of the video game that applied to this episode. So maybe that'll happen later in the video game. I don't know. But it really made her seem like some sort of psychopath. It was really creepy.
I didn't enjoy this episode even before we looked at the game footage.
Yeah.
And found out how different this was from the game footage. This was a boring episode. They were in that town for entirely too long. They were in this flashback for entirely too long because the majority of the episode was in this flashback with Bill and Frank. And it was boring. I was bored to death when it came to this stuff. And then when Joel and Tess appeared in the flashback and they showed up, I'm like, oh, maybe this is going to go somewhere. And I guess it kind of did because that's how he knew Bill in the TV series, but in a different way, because the reason in the video game Bill helped Joel is Joel did something that he thought that Bill owed him a vehicle to get out of the area. It just felt to me like these were two entirely different stories. This isn't a different interpretation like when Tess, she blew up the bottom of that building with her lighter instead of going out shooting with Fedra. But this isn't like that. This is completely different. Frank and Bill did not have a healthy relationship in the video game, unless later on we're going to visit Bill again and see that was a lie of what happened.
I
doubt that is. Bill and Frank had a very dysfunctional relationship. I have family members growing up that had just that relationship. You were uncomfortable being around them because you could tell they didn't belong together. And that's what it felt like to me, what Bill and Frank were supposed to be in the video game.
Like, even in the TV show, it felt really creepy when Frank showed up. Because at first, I really thought he was going to bash Bill's brains in and just start living in his house.
Yep.
It was really creepy. And then it turns out that they're both gay. Okie dokie. Bill is a virgin. And it just, like, they're getting it on that first day that they meet each other. And it just was really gross to me. Like, if that was a man and a woman, it would still be gross. Like, that was gross. And apparently this lifelong relationship that ended in a double suicide started from that. And it felt so creepy from the beginning. This episode was not good. I mean, if you want to watch the series, I say skip this episode. All you really need to know is that Joel and Ellie have acquired a car. Well, a truck. But they've acquired transportation. And just go from there.
Yeah, you can skip this episode. It added nothing to the narrative. It would have been nice if they would have spent that episode going through the town like they did in the video game looking for car parts. Mm-hmm. That could have been a very fun episode where Ellie and Bill were sniping back and forth at each other. But all you need to do is say, look, they got a vehicle now. Don't even bother watching episode 3. That's really the only thing that changes this whole episode. And that's why this episode is a waste of time.
Yeah.
Because we're not lying to you when we say, just know they have a vehicle. Everything else that occurred in this episode doesn't matter. You don't need to watch it. It doesn't add to the narrative at all. They wasted 50 minutes or however long this episode was just to acquire a vehicle.
Yep. Yeah. So obviously I'm going to watch again next Sunday, but far less enthusiastically. And yeah, I will definitely make sure to let everybody know, does the series come back from this, or is this the way it's going to be from here on out?
We just published that video praising it.
Yep, very disappointed.
And that's what really annoys me. We were praising HBO Max. We were saying, look, they made some narrative changes, but overall, they're sticking with the spirit of the show. And even if you don't look at it as a video game, you don't need to watch the video game. It's still pretty darn good. This episode 3, not only did it not really follow the video game except for some character names, but it wasn't good television.
No.
And I feel so badly putting up that video, giving it credit.
Yep.
So all I can hope is episode 4 moves on and this episode 3 was an anomaly. Otherwise, I feel guilty that we recommended to viewers to give this a try if the series is going to take this hard turn like this.
Yep. So, you know what, HBO, that really sucked. And as I said, we'll watch the next episode. We'll see where it goes. But man, they've really taken the wind out of the sails on this one.
What did you guys think? Did you watch the episode yet? If you did, are we looking at this wrong? Or maybe this stuff was introduced later in the game? Why don't you let us know in the comments if we're on the right track here, or maybe we just need to be more patient, and maybe a lot of these story elements that they introduced in this episode are going to flesh out later. Maybe they're going to talk about Bill more later in the game. So let us know what's going on with people who have played the video game. Let us know, are we way off here, or should we just be patient here and things will come together?